Video, I wanted to follow a very specific and somewhat narrow thread of all of the ways that my mental emotional limitations have shown up in my romantic relationships and the various strategies and coping mechanisms around that. So I'll start with I guess the first way that it showed up was realizing that pain and trauma were a really big deal, that good people could easily hurt each other if they were emotionally and mentally sick, that it required great skill to connect in a healthy way, and that I wanted to set myself up for success by not engaging until I had life skills. So the first way that it showed up was just simply abstaining. So I made a choice in my teens to abstain until I was around 30. Now, I met a woman in a gas station who was absolutely delightful. She was about 50 years old. She was delightful, warm, kind, very feminine, and I connected with her. Had an amazing phone romance, but she never reciprocated as much as I did, and it really hurt. We had sex once, and it was just very hard to navigate. And I found myself kind of going round and round in circles for 4 years in a way that was very painful. And so this led to a third approach, or a third adaptation, which was not to enter relationships without beginning a conscious, kind ending agreement at the beginning. And this seemed perfectly logical because 95% of all the people we meet, we will effectively end the relationship with before death. By effectively, I mean if you don't see each other even once a year or something, it doesn't matter if you're theoretically friends. You don't have the intimacy and the depth of what's going on and the rapport for it to be considered a relationship. And the other logic was that most of the ways I see most romantic relationships ending are sloppy and filled with pain. And this is exactly what you don't want when you already have an inherent pain of a separation. So you've got an inherently difficult thing, a sense of perhaps failure, a sense of shame, a sense of disappointment, and a sense of loss. And at that very moment, you do not want weird, painful behavior. And so I thought an ending agreement would be very kind and intelligent. And if, what I would tell a partner is 95% of all relationships end for reasons other than death. Assuming that we are both kind and honorable people, the ending will be because we've stopped growing together, or that we are happier apart. One or both of us is happier apart than together. And we should end if one or both of us is happier apart than together, particularly if we have exhausted our opportunities to change the relationship and ourselves in a way that we would be happier together. And if we cannot, we've given each other an enormous gift of choosing one another out of 6 billion people. Let's honor it in a good and kind way. So that's another adaptation. Abstaining until 30. I met another woman when I was 28, and so another adaptation was picking older and experienced, and skill over lust and attraction. In other words, I felt a very mild attraction, lust to her, but was mostly a sense that this is a safe, skilled, experienced older woman. Relationships are complicated. Why on earth would I want both people in the relationship to be unexperienced and unskilled? It's like flying a plane. I mean, if you've got your co-pilot is not very experienced, you at least want a very experienced pilot until you get the hang of things. But within this relationship, I got very nervous around, like, there was certain terrain where the relationship would be going along, and I would just feel this incredible anxiety and a block coming up. And I realized that in that terrain, things had to go a certain way or they would be disastrous, and that my partner could not be relied upon to know the certain way or that it was in that area. And so I had to come up with graceful and yet effective ways of navigating through this incredible block. And what I did was scripting, and so I would talk about, I would say, okay, we're coming up to a new experience we've never had before, and it is going to go a certain way, but I don't want it to go a certain way just instinctively. I want to talk it through and make sure that every detail is for both of us. And so then I would kind of go through this detailed script and basically get the check mark for both of us that it was a good script, or not proceed into that very, very delicate terrain. And I can't tell you how frightening it was to know that this was the case, but to also realize that, like, it's not negotiable for me not to have this negotiation. And yet most people would not have the negotiation. I've experienced that so many times where someone is unable or unwilling to have the negotiation. And so that's another thing, is a scripting approach. And doing this regularly, like she might say, hey, let's go for a drive. And then I know that particularly if I'm a passenger, that I might reach a point where I feel really tense and overwhelmed, and I have to get hyper controlling to help me cope with those feelings. And I know I don't like fighting, that's really traumatic, or arguing. And so the idea of being trapped in a car and not being able to control things and being in that state is terrifying. So I'll kind of pause and I'll scan through it in my mind, and I'll look at where the bottlenecks, where the bottlenecks might occur. So one area they might occur is I start to get overwhelmed. I want to go back home, but she wants to continue. So then I say, well, let's imagine that I want to go back home and you want to continue. How do you feel about both of us having the right to cancel the road trip at any point. That the person who doesn't want to go has automatic, without arguing, veto. And we go back. Does that feel good to you? Are you willing to agree to that? Because if not, I fully understand and support you, but I'm not going on that road trip. And so this kind of conversation, clearing and doing check marks in the bottlenecks, and then also things like, okay, I could imagine music being an issue. So let's agree that we have silence unless we both like the audio track and the volume. Let's agree that I can drive if I feel uncomfortable in the passenger seat. So with these three checks being the possible bottlenecks of emotional friction that I could experience, if I get 3 yeses and they seem clear yeses, then I go. If I get 3 yeses, but there's resentment and hesitation in her face, then I might say, we don't have to go on this road trip, and I see some resentment and hesitation on your face. I don't want to go and have you resent this, but I need this in order to go. And that might stimulate a good conversation, or we might just go. So that's another adaptation that's coping with overwhelming emotion. Now, then there's the next thing is sleeping together. I'm a very light sleeper. I need control of my body. I find someone's touch overwhelming when I'm trying to sleep. And so I've got to negotiate. I might say, how do you feel about coming over? And they might say, great. And I'd say, well, before you come over and sleep over, I want to talk about what that looks like for me, and I want to make sure that that's a nice experience for you. And then I'll say, well, for me, I like to cuddle, and then I start to get drowsy, and at a certain point where I drift off, I want to fully disconnect, and I want a foot between us, and I don't want you to touch me, and I don't want any words said until I get my consciousness in the morning. And then when I'm ready to start talking, then you can start talking to me, but I'll say the first words, and this is really important to me, or the whole day is ruined. How does that sound to you? And maybe half the women will say, oh, that's so disappointing. I really like to cuddle with my partner. And I say, I completely understand. And I also say this is an important part of chemistry, because about a third of your time in a good close relationship is sleeping. So this is an important area of compatibility. And I support you in choosing another partner if my approach really doesn't work. Some women say, oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that. You put it so well. I have those same feelings, but I don't tell people, and I don't like sleeping with people because of it, and blah, blah, blah. So it can work really well. It can be a disaster. But the important thing is to do this before and at the point of sleeping together, or making the decision to sleep together. So that's adaptation, I guess, number 6. Adaptation number 7. I remember meeting someone, and it was we decided it would be a 2-week relationship because she was going back to England. And so we had a clear agreement that we would be monogamous partners as long as she was in town. And then we would end our relationship because of the long distance. And she wanted to take a couple of days off to be with some other friends during that 2 weeks. And I said, okay, on condition that you have a completely clear and set start time of that visit. We both know when that is. And return time. And that is to the minute, that there's no leaving me hanging or change of plans. If you do leave me hanging and change plan, that is the end of the relationship. So if you can agree to that, I will support this couple of days visit with friends, but you need to return at that time. And that, I just knew that that was absolutely important. And that if I had the certainty and clarity of that container, I would be fine. But if I didn't, I would absolutely emotionally withdraw. Of course, I'm not going to continue a relationship physically that I'm not there emotionally. And so she needed to keep that. And she kept it within about 10 minutes. And she called and said, you know, we're having traffic and this and that, but please understand I'm on my way. And she communicated beforehand. She communicated how hard she was working on it. I heard the emotion in her voice. I felt the solidness of her desire, and she was within a few minutes. And so that worked very well. Another adaptation that came up with another partner was talking. Like, I would get really frazzled with her energy and style of talking, but I appreciated many things about her. And so I would start getting exhausted and disoriented. And I needed a way to take charge of these feelings, which were being triggered by her talking. So I would have a boundary with her often. You can come over in silence. And if you need to communicate anything, you can write notes. And so that worked very well. From my perspective, I immediately was not overwhelmed and disoriented around her anymore. I loved the silence. I felt some sense of enjoyment of the power and the control compared to the powerlessness if I'm just dissociated and exhausted. The more you talk, and I have no control over that because you just go on and on and on. And it's so unpleasant that I'm then dreading the next thing. It's like, how uncomfortable is this going to get before you, at your whim, decide to stop talking? And that was relatively specific to her. But of course, rather than waiting for unbearable discomfort, it felt way better to be in control and comfortable. So powerless and very uncomfortable, control and comfortable. She was very uncomfortable at times, but the adaptation felt appropriate and the logic for me was, if we can't find a way that we both enjoy relating, we should end the relationship. She didn't want to end the relationship. So I thought it was my job to give her a choice that she could relate to me in a way that was comfortable for me, which I came up with a note thing. It worked brilliantly the first time I did it. So I thought, okay, I can't think of any other thing that would work since it's her talking that's triggering all the distress. And this does work, meaning I prefer being with her than alone, with her silent and writing notes. I also found it very funny. to be in that kind of a dance, and I appreciated the innovation. So a lot of me really liked it, but her friends were really furious with her for being in the relationship, which they labeled as, being highly controlling. And this, I think, ties into the need, it leads me to a sense of feeling very unsafe in a lot of judgmental social contexts. Because I don't find most people are interested in understanding in the United States. They're interested in judging and labeling, and particularly the whole label manufacture of red flags. And to me, there's only a couple of things that are important: honesty and transparency, so that people can make educated choices. And two, that both people's lives improve as a result of the relationship, more than anything else they could be doing or know how to do, and being alone, including being alone. Now, if a relationship meets that criteria, however strange, and here's what I mean. Let's say you've just had a leg chopped off by an alligator, and you've got a raving, drug addict lunatic who is also willing to carry you on their back to the nearest hospital. And they get something out of ranting and having a good listening ear, and you're a good listener. That is a healthy win-win relationship as far as I'm concerned. Because the alternative for you with a bit off leg is death, and the alternative for them is no one's going to be willing to talk with them. So they lug you off to the nearest hospital. It maybe takes 3 days to get there, and they get a lot off their chest in that period. That is a win-win relationship as long as it lasts. And I'm not going to say this is a red flag or whatever. I'm going to say, bravo, you both grew and seized an opportunity, and that's healthy. No one is perfect. And so I'm interested in the complexity of these things, and it bothers me no end that I think many people are alone and lonely because they're obsessing with red flags from a basis of perfection rather than creativity and innovation from the basis of a step forward in well-being. And the other thing I think that's important is freedom. And so it's like telling this woman, you are not bound to me. You're free to spend time with anyone that you want, including the friends that love listening to you talk for hours. But anytime you want to come over here, or 90% of the time, and particularly if you invite yourself, I want you to invite yourself over on the expectation that you will be silent. And if that doesn't feel good to you on that day, then don't come and do something else. I mean, that seemed like, it's not like she's a slave. She's a 65-year-old, mature, highly intelligent woman with lots of friends who's getting a lot out of our relationship from what she's said. And And I'm not getting that much out of the relationship, but partly because I like serving people who are getting a lot out of relating to me. Meaning I like that. That's fun. Someone's getting a lot out of relationship to me, and I'm getting something, I'm going to prioritize that relationship higher than if I'm getting maybe even a little more and someone else is just getting a little. Because I look at the total units of value generated by the relationship, even if most of them are on the side of my partner. And I think, I want to be in a relationship that's generating a lot of value. So the ninth adaptation is, so that was, let's see what we had here. The ninth adaptation is something I experienced quite recently, which is my silence. That I can reach a state in which talking is enormously exhausting and distressing. It's painful. And it sometimes comes on very suddenly. And when it does, I've got to say, I need to be silent. If you want to ask me anything, write me a note. I will write a note in reply. Or just please, if at all possible, don't say anything for a long time. And I'll let you know when I'm done. And this can last 1, 2, 3, 5 hours. And I'm not able to put into words why. I just know that I need that desperately. And if I can't have that, if it's not respected, if it's not honored, I feel rage. And I've got to get the person out of my space. And so I've experienced that probably maybe 10 times in my relationship history. Another is exhaustive sleep, that I absolutely can't wake up and engage. I need to rest at certain times. Another adaptation and thing I've noticed is I need to be touched in a certain way. I need to be touched very slowly and presently with love. And so I've gotten relatively good at picking my masseuses and masseurs and training them. So that's an adaptation. And I'll just do a 2-minute hand demonstration, and I'll watch their energy, their respect, their response, and their ability to mirror me. If they do it well, it's absolute exquisite bliss. And I'll continue to teach them, and I'll give them a big tip. And it's only about 10% of masseurs and masseuses can do this. If they don't, it can be absolute hell, and I'll just walk out of a massage, whether I pay for it, the full thing or not. I'll just leave. And I'll also very actively coach. Another adaptation is turning off TV and radio. If a client invites me over to do some landscape design, I will just say, I need to turn this off to pay full attention to you. You're paying me a lot for your time, and they are. And so I want to have my full attention. I just turn it off. And I think that's most of the adaptions that that are coming to mind. Another one though is driving around and moving. I use different lenses to look at things, but for example, today, as I was leaving the hotel, there were a couple of things my mind wanted to do today. One was go to a temple, one was go to this restaurant, one was going to another restaurant, one was to go to a massage, one was to spend some time up at a special place at the top of the hotel. And I could not reconcile exactly, which I wanted to do first and in what order. And so sometimes, particularly when I've got a month of vacation and, this, or a whole day in front of me and no time pressure, I will just meander. And so in this case, I thought, well, I'm going to go here. But when I got to the point where I would turn that way with my motorbike, it seemed more fun to turn the other way, which took me into the unknown. Like, I don't know what'll happen if I turn this way, but that seemed more fun. So I did it. And then my mind goes ahead and I think, well, where might I want to be going if it seems more fun to turn this way? And I'll try and extrapolate and say, well, I could be heading this way. This is in the direction of this, this, and this. Is there any of that I actually want to do? And sometimes I say no, but I want to go in that direction. And so I just let my mind try and create stories and scenarios and head that direction. And sometimes the thread is lost, the energy thread of the desire of going. Then I just do a U-turn, head off in the other direction. And sometimes I'll just spend an hour kind of meandering this way and that way, fully aware that I can override it at any point, but I'm getting enormous satisfaction with following these impulses. And the story I make up is, well, driving around is cheap compared to anything I would be doing. Like if I go to a 5-star restaurant and order a meal, it's expensive. If I drive halfway to that restaurant, turn around and come back and enjoy every moment of the spontaneity, and then I drive towards something else, and then I do a U-turn there and head there, and then like today, I went towards Kata Beach, got almost there, did a U-turn, came back, enjoyed the ride immensely. Then I went towards Rawai, got almost there, turned around, came back, enjoyed it immensely. Then I went to, I thought I'd go to my hotel, then I changed my mind. Then I went to another place, and then I changed my mind again, then I came back to the hotel again, so this is the third. This time I enjoyed going to the hotel. Then I got to the top of the hotel place, they didn't have the cushions ready, and then I changed my mind again. And I found the whole process, which maybe took about 45 minutes, deeply satisfying. And my partner just gently, contentedly leaning against my back the whole time with her head on my shoulder, enjoying the experience, not giving me a hard time at all. But what I would say to someone if I wanted to embark on this kind of thing without getting flack, because to the Western efficient mind, this is insanity. But I'm trying to figure out, like, there's got to be some intelligent reason that I have this impulse. And what is it? Well, one thing is it messes with my normal thought pattern. So my thought is, I'm giving myself the message that joy and spontaneity are more important than efficiency. Because if I didn't have joy and spontaneity and doing all these U-turns, I wouldn't be doing them, one. And they're absolutely inefficient. And yet, is it better to get somewhere fast with less joy than to meander around with more joy? And since the focus of a holiday is joy, it's much more effective to be inefficiently joyful than efficiently annoyed or impatient. So I use that rationale, and I would just tell someone, I'm going to meander around endlessly and see what happens, and would you like to come, or would you want to do something else? But I love my partner that she loves to go on these journeys, so that would be driving around, aimlessly in that mode. There's lots of preparation that I do as an adaptation. Having phone calls disconnected suddenly or whatever is a nightmare for me. And so I keep, here's my kind of phone network. So I'll keep a battery backup, a laptop, a desktop, a laptop backup, an unusually high Skype internet speed, LAN cable, plus wireless option, plus 3G wireless option, was a Wi-Fi 3G, and a house phone, and a Skype phone, and a cell phone. So with all of that, and with a Skype worldwide calling plan, there's a 95% chance that one way or another, I will not be dropping someone else's call and will be available. And that's really important to me. So that's that kind of detailed preparation that kind of is an adaptation for all of this. Another thing that I find is that I need 4-hour visits or more. And another thing is that I need to be in harmony and partnership. Rather than in silent judgment and unilateral relationship. So what I do, knowing I need 4 hours a day for a romantic relationship, knowing I need 4 hours a week for a friend, I do screening around that. So people say, hey, Dane, that sounds so interesting. I'd love to be friends. And I say, well, do you have 4 hours a week? And if they say, well, probably, I say, okay, when would you like to meet for 4 hours this week? If they say, oh, this week I really can't make it. And I say, well, I've learned that, one, people do what's most important to them. And two, this week has a good likelihood of representing your typical week. And so if you can't find a single 4 hours this week, it's either not that important or you just have a life that's too packed. I could meet you today or tomorrow for 4 hours in most cases. And so we're probably not a fit. But then the other thing is harmony and partnership. I ask to have a rich 12-hour conversation. And in that 12-hour conversation, I like to say, like, what does a good friend look like to you? What does a terrible friend look like to you? Here's what a good friend looks like to me. Here's what a terrible friend looks like to me. And with that data on the table, we can then see how good a friend we are likely to be for one another. And I can say right off the bat, you find this a terrible friend. Well, I do that. So is that a deal breaker? Should we separate, or is there a workaround? And I love this kind of conversation because it's partnering with love and respect, as opposed to projecting and then blaming and punishing and being unhappy if the other person's doing what they always do and normally and like to do doesn't work for us, but we didn't take the time to talk about it. We just assumed or demanded, and then we're disappointed. So that's a big thing. So these are the adaptations, and and I have one other adaptation. Noticing that my mother lied, one, and two, grew dependent on my father because she didn't have a job and had very little financial skills. I require a 50-50 split on finances in relationship, and I'll clarify that up front. So I'll say, how do you feel about, you pick a comfortable budget for you, since I can go up to $5,000 a month in shared relationship expenses quite comfortably. So you pick, I think if it's a romantic relationship and it's serious, I think you should have a minimum of $300 a month that's there for shared relationship expenses. Now, I will match you as high as you go. So if you want $300 a month, that's $600 a month we have for gifts, workshop, possible travel, restaurants, gas, phone bills, you name it. Relationship has expense. So if you've got $300 or more, I think we can have a reasonably full-bodied relationship with that, and it'll be equal. But you set the budget and I'll match it, and we'll have a framework of equality and partnership. Because A, I don't want you in it for the money. B, I don't want you getting dependent on me. C, I want it to be very clear that the relationship will end if it's not satisfying you on an emotional, spiritual level, not because it's, it won't stay together because it's inconvenient to move out or something like that. You should have your own place and all that. So this is another adaptation, and it gets rid of about 60% of women that would that they're looking for a protector provider, and the basis of a man to provide and protect is a primary filter as a key criteria around relationship. And I don't want to be chosen as that. I want to be chosen because someone's having more growth, fun, value, and joy with me than with other things available. And with some women that is perfectly possible and happens, and with others it doesn't. And I want to see that it's determined on that basis. So these are the different adaptations, and there's an interesting balance between the fact that these create exceptional relationships, unusual relationships, rich, conscious, high growth relationships, but they also, I'd say 60% of the reason I do them is I don't have an alternative. They are not popular. these things. I don't get rejected that much in a very vague way. Like if I just say, hey, how's it going? Let's have a conversation sometime. I don't get rejected very often, particularly if I want to appear attractive. I don't. So here's actually another thing. I hate getting attached and then being let down. And so one of my core strategies is to lead with negative. So here's what I mean. If I'm leading with a positive, I could say something like, highly spiritual, well-educated, entrepreneurial business owner, loves traveling 6 months of the year or more, enjoys these types of books, published author, blah, 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 leads groups on relationships, does this, I can just list, some of the many hundreds of goals that I've achieved and my strengths and what my friends say about me in a positive sense and da-da-da. Sounds all brilliant. I'm not interested in that, though. I will say something like, I have these positive traits, but what I really want you to consider is I'm super controlling in different terrains. I'm highly sensitive and picky. I have PTSD and am strongly affected by others. I need a minimum of 4 hours a day of your time for a romantic relationship. One-on-one, quality one-on-one time. Otherwise, I'm not going to be happy, or it needs to be in an open relationship. I have been in ineffective open relationships if you don't have that time but are attracted to the scenario. So all of this is very unpopular. And it's also unusual to lead with the negative. Now, I lead with this for a strategic reason. One, I know that if I read a profile like that, I would jump on it, because what the person is really telling me is they're candid, they're self-aware, and they don't like small talk, and they're not interested in appearances, which is brilliant. Now, if they pick me, it tells me they're highly intelligent and they're willing to break the mold of typical dating netiquette and etiquette in order to find a great partner and go deep with. So I would rather be, rejected 100 to 200 times, which I am when I lead with the negative, and see the people that get through that filter, which tend to be pretty extraordinary people, rather than, have a variety of people with about maybe half of them flaking out on the first, second, or third date because of those very things that are going to come up pretty rapidly, because I have a very high pain wall that I run into if I don't respect certain things, if I feel scared and I don't know where I stand. That also leads to another adaptation, which is that if someone doesn't respond and make time to grow in the first 3 days of me contacting them, I often write and say, I'm sorry, you seem too busy, but since I need 4 hours a day, and I wrote to you 3 days ago saying, are you interested in meeting? You're saying you don't even have even 10 minutes to respond to an email in 72 hours. That's either not interested enough, or you don't have enough time in your life for a relationship as I define that. And so this is a respectful goodbye. Now, sometimes people get really pissed at that, but that's the truth. And what I find is I'm left hanging in an uncontained space that's quite vulnerable and kind of in that sense of, in that terrain of trauma, if I don't close the container. So it's really important for me to have good, clear closure. And if I'm not getting that from the person, I can just create that by writing to them and saying, this is goodbye and wishing you well. Occasionally, that, because there's a variety of women who are actually far more attracted to someone walking away from them than someone inviting something immediately, I often will get this dance if I'm doing that. Like about 10% of the women I say goodbye to, they've done absolutely nothing for 3 days to reply to me. I write to them, and within 10 minutes, they're like, what do you mean goodbye? I was just about to write to you, and da-da-da-da-da. It's like they weren't just about to write to me, but they find something attractive about me saying goodbye, which I don't need them, or it prompts them or something. And I might give them a chance. I might say, well, how are you doing today? As I say, I need 4 hours a day. You haven't replied. And it's almost never a fit, but occasionally it is. It's a little bit risky to me because I don't like relating to someone who's more attracted to me when I say no. I want someone who's very attracted to a yes. But that is a very rare person to find. So again, the question I'll ask myself is this a step forward over nothing? Or is this not? So those are just some of the many ways that I adapt. Another is it's very painful for me to be interrupted, and so I will frequently ask not to be interrupted, and will help people get a notepad if they want to write down a question, or try and come up with some strategy where I don't get interrupted. So these are my coping mechanisms that simultaneously lead to some pretty conscious high growth relationships for obvious reasons, and which I can't be very flexible around because I start feeling peak traumatic state and anxiety if I try and be more flexible. And so it's kind of like I'm forced into having really conscious high growth relationships, even though almost all the people I meet don't want that on a technical level. They want it to happen without doing the things that make it happen. And I wish I could be more graceful and fluid about it rather than in such a panic and state, because that's not attractive to most people. So thanks for listening.